Hello and welcome. And today I am joined with Owen Bailey, who is going to speak to us about an addiction that we don't really talk about. We don't really think about when we're thinking about addiction, and that's gambling. And I'm really keen to speak to Owen about that and about his journey around that and where that's taken him. So, hello, Owen.
Hello, how you doing?
I'm really good, and it's really good to have you on the podcast. And I just would like to honour actually that you're about to share some personal stuff with us about your story, and I know that that can sometimes take something from us because we're giving something of ourselves. So I just wanted to thank you for joining me and doing that.
You're welcome.
So we're connected on Twitter, but actually we've known each other for quite a while, haven't we?
We certainly have, yeah.
Yeah. Now we met when I was doing fundraising for the Lee community. Now that has got to be because I climbed the Great Wall of China. Well, I say
That's right.
that. I say that like I just arrived in China and climbed the Great Wall. It wasn't quite like that, but that was the event. And that must have been 2014, I think. Do you think?
Yeah, yeah, I think so. Yeah, sounds about right.
Yeah.
Wow,
Um, and I know it's been a while. Maybe 2015. I don't know. Anyway,
around
um,
that time.
so what's interesting for me is that you have been on such a journey since then, and I'd like us to start thinking about that journey from your fundraising that you've just done recently,
Yeah,
which took you climbing um, mountains all over Scotland. You went to see Gabor Mate at the Ace Aware Nation event. So should we start at the mountain and sort of let's see where that takes us in thinking about the journey that you've been on.
mm, yeah, I'd love to. So when I was in my early 20s, I was volunteering for a charity, and I took that experience of volunteering for this charity took me all over the country. And I haven't done any mountaineering or outdoor stuff for ever since then. So it's a good 15 years or so. And when I realised that Aceware Nation was going to happen at the beginning of June this year, and that Gabor Mate was going to come across from Canada to speak, I was really keen to attend this event, and then realised as well that there's another event happening in Wales at the end of June. So I'm thinking, here I am, I've got a bit of time. I want to take a break. There's these two conferences, one at the beginning of June, one at the end of June. And I'm thinking, well, why not connect the two conferences with a challenge? And it inspired me to do the Three Peaks Challenge. And and so that was how the idea came about, really. I thought, if I'm going to climb the Three Peaks, why not raise some money? So I gave it some thought, and I chose a charity that was quite neutral to me, a charity that I've got no affiliation with, Action on Addiction. So that was kind of like the start of my adventure, really. And it was really, really good. So it's the first fundraising effort I've ever done. So I had to do a lot of preparation, a lot of planning. And I'm really pleased that it went really, really well. I had a great time. And I feel a lot better for it. And yeah, I think it was a really good success. I raised quite a bit of money for Action on Addiction. And I've discovered something for me as well. I've discovered something that I want to take on even further in terms of going on the outdoors, and I'm really looking forward to planning and preparing my next adventure, wherever that might take me. So now I've had a little taste of it. I'm keen to do more.
That's lovely, and I can hear your kind of excitement. I can hear your enthusiasm, and just that kind of sense of having achieved something that meant so much for you. And I wonder, can we go back 10 years and see where you were 10 years ago, or pick a year around that time, but maybe some of your darker moments when
mm,
you were completely taken over by addiction?
Yeah. 10 years ago is quite a good place to start, really, because 10 years ago I was in full swing of a very heavy relapse using pharmaceuticals, amphetamines, alcohol, gambling. I was in a mess, and I had relapsed after having used what community-based services I had in the area I was living. And I remember having to re-engage in community-based services, having relapsed, having reached a rock bottom. And it was then there and then where we decided to look at residential rehab. So we began that process to look at residential rehabs, and I visited a couple, and then that's where I ended up visiting the lay community. And in March, in the following March, 10 years ago, I became a resident there. So that was the start of my 20-month stay at the Lee community. And I think, this is a really important chapter in my journey, because it was being placed in that bubble where I began to grow up and mature and learn a lot about myself. I struggled to achieve what I achieved in the Lee community within the community. So I think it was a really good move to go to the Lee community. It was a very tough decision to make, because I had to uproot from the place where I was living, and I found that quite a challenge, but it was worth it.
And just for people who aren't kind of familiar with addiction, or certainly the gambling aspect of addiction, what would a day look like when you were in the throes of your addiction?
It's all very hit and miss. Reflecting on some of my darker moments, I think particularly with the gambling, because gambling wasn't my number one addiction. And economically, I've been very, very poor and impoverished. And so whenever I used to get my money, I would be totally consumed with the desire, the craving to gamble. And I would be in the bookmakers, and I'd be playing the fixed odds betting terminals. And usually, more often than not, on the very morning that I had that money, I would be without any money, and I wouldn't have paid my rent. I wouldn't have bought any food. I would totally neglected all my financial responsibilities, and so I'd end up having to spend the next week or fortnight, a month, or however long, trying to survive. And that was tough, because this didn't happen just once or twice or a dozen times. This happened for several years, and that's just how gripping the gambling got me. It just grabbed onto me really, really tight, and I just couldn't let go, and put me in some really, really dark situations where I had to resort to certain behaviours in order to survive, and that was harsh.
Yeah, and the feelings that you're left with when you have to live like that, when you are living in that way. I mean, what I'm hearing from you is that state of despair and bewilderment at having done it again, but not having any other options available to you, and then having to do things you don't want to do in order to service that. It's the spiral of it, isn't it? The cycle of it that's so hard to break.
Yeah, I'm sure many people can identify. I just felt very, very trapped, and I felt that there's no other option but to gamble as a means of getting myself out of the situation. But by gambling even further, I just continued to entrench my situation, and keep myself stuck. And for all my adult life, up until about last year, although they've made some progress over the past few years, particularly, it just felt like I was taking one step back. One step forward, 10 steps back, and I was just, potentially going around in perpetual cycles, and it was really horrible time.
We had a conversation on Twitter just recently around that feeling of exclusion, and how that had been a part of your kind of experiences. I just wonder if you could unpack that a little bit, because it looked to me when we were having that interchange that was a little bit of a light bulb moment, and I'm just wondering if it was, or if it's something that you'd really had an awareness of.
Yeah, in the 16 years I've engaged in therapy, I've done a lot of therapy. I've done a lot of cognitive behavioural therapy, a lot of psychodynamic therapy. I've had to revisit my past a lot, not just once, but a good few times. And so I've done a lot of looking, done a lot of searching. And when I reflect back upon around my early teenage years, I remember wanting to belong. And the only way I felt I could belong was to act out and be the bad boy. So that I didn't realise it at the time, but there's definitely a yearning for some kind of acceptance and belonging. And I think I found it really difficult to socialise and be around people. Building relationships were a huge challenge for me, and I think because of some of the stuff I experienced as a child growing up, I had a very temperamental nature. I was very volatile, quite abusive, disruptive, violent. I would steal, and I think although that got me some kind of attention, it didn't do my relationships any favours. And I think when I reflect back on the times I've tried to build relationships up in my teenage years, there's a lot of destruction there. I caused a lot of destruction. And I think the difficulty with relationships, I was, as much as I wanted to belong, but they were also a source of threat. Relationships of all kinds of descriptions were very threatening. It felt very unsafe. It felt almost dangerous. And I think upon reflection, I think this fear of people, of connecting with others, of trying to build relationships, I do feel that for me, in my instance, it was this fear that led towards a liking for gambling and other behaviours, particularly gambling, because when I was in front of a fruit machine, it felt very, very safe. So I think I felt more comfortable having an relationship with a fruit machine than I would a human being. So I think I became very avoidant. So rather than, face the risk and feel the fear and build up relationships with people, I would rather go to an amusement arcade and gamble where it felt safe. And I think I developed some kind of real unhealthy emotional attachment to gambling. And so yeah, that really didn't do me any favours. I think that provided very good basis for many years of pathological gambling years later. I suppose perhaps I've digressed a little bit. I think schooling was my school was very, very difficult because of my struggles with relationships and my behaviour. I was always in detention. If I wasn't in detention, I was suspended. I was suspended a total of 7 times, and I was permanently excluded a total of 4 times throughout my secondary education, and I left with no formal qualifications. Academically, I showed a lot of promise, but throughout my secondary school years, I fell behind, really. So my teenage years were, they're quite busy. There's a lot of stuff there.
And as someone who, my work's around trauma, and I speak to many adults who are on the other side of childhood trauma at various points in recovery, and I'm always so taken by the trajectory, whether we work forwards or backwards, there's always this space of seeking belonging, relational trauma, seeking safety. And these are the things that I'm always working so hard with people to do for children and young people, like you were, and actually like I was. And I think I find that there's a sadness for me when there's an utter joy at recovery, because recovery is so joyful, but there's a sadness of the journey and trajectory that what is clearly a young person screaming out for help actually just gets one exclusion after another. And I don't just mean the 4 school exclusions that you got, which were bad enough, but the continuing exclusion in all senses and in all ways, and how you excluded yourself as a form of self-protection. So it's there's always that joy and sadness when I speak to adults, but at the end of the day, we go on the journeys that we go on, and to get to where we get to. So let's leave all that darkness and all that behind us, and I want us to go to the lay community, and I'm going to take us there because I was just so taken with that recovery program, and yet I know that it's not in existence in that form that it was, because of financial challenges that it's tried to fight off for a number of years now. But tell people what was so special about that recovery program in the lay community.
Wow, yeah, where do I begin? We could be here for the next 3 hours, so that's a bit of a challenge. It's my first experience of a residential treatment setting, and wow, it was tough. I cried a lot, and I went through a lot of pain, but it was a therapeutic pain, and it was a really powerful experience, because although the numbers fluctuated, there's a good 30 to 50 people there at any one time. Wow, you're having to make me think now. So upon reflection, I think it was really quite intense. So from when we got up to when we went to bed, there's a full structure, and everyone was split up into departments. So people would be working in the kitchen, people would be working to maintain the grounds, and all of these departments represented some kind of micro work kind of place. And we would be encouraged to work with each other and try to build up relationships with everyone. And we would be encouraged to identify and respond to any of our concerns regarding our peers' behaviours or attitudes. We'd be encouraged to write them on slips, and we'd put those slips into a box. And every Monday and Thursday we'd have groups, and then we'd have an opportunity to confront this person upon their behaviour or attitude through care or concern. And it was in these groups where I believe a lot of growth could happen, because I had no option but to sit and listen to what was being told to me. And for me, in my experience, I found that incredibly difficult. I had to face some really, really hard truths, and I had to hear some really, really difficult things about me. I soon realised that the way I felt about myself, the way I dealt with the world, the way I saw the world was quite wrong. It'd become really quite distorted, if that makes any sense. I'm not too sure if there's a better way of explaining that. So I think over the time I was there, I think I learned a lot about myself, about how I affected others through my own behaviour, my attitude, my beliefs. So I was challenged, but in a very safe context. And I think it was in these groups where I did a lot of stuff did come up for me, and on occasions I did have the opportunity to explore some of the stuff that had happened as a child and as a teenager, which could have explained some of the reasons as to why I was behaving or acting in such a way. But I suppose one thing I realised was that in order for me to get better, I need to get to grips with this whole idea of building relationships. So I mentioned earlier on, just a few minutes ago, how I was avoidant at building relationships. Relationships scared for me, So here I am in a residential treatment setting, and I was confronting pretty much a fear. I had no option but to kind of work through this fear and look at how I can improve my ability to work at my relationships. So yeah, it's really challenging on all kinds of fronts.
Because it's not just the being challenged, it's challenging another, isn't it? And it's also learning and developing how to do that safely, and everybody does not then hurt you or leave you, so it's real relational healing stuff, while being deeply therapeutic. It's teaching you some of those really core relationship skills, like how you hear another person, and it's witnessed in the group. So
Yes.
there's not really space for you to kind of and this is the beauty of, you know, community provisions. I think there's not the space to misunderstand or mishear something through your filter, or to bat it off, because you've got all these other people bearing witness to what is being said.
Absolutely, and that's a brilliant component of it, you know. And I don't think I would have been able to achieve what I achieved within the community, you know. So yeah, absolutely. I'm really glad I went. I look at that chapter, I look at that part of my life, and that was the beginning. That was the end of the old Owen. That was the beginning of the new Owen.
And that's not been straightforward, has it? The new Owen.
Definitely not. No. So as much as I began to grow up and mature and learn a lot about myself within the league community, I still struggled. Even right at the very end, I really still had really big, serious issues around relationships. I still felt very isolated and very alone. There were still these barriers, these obstacles in front of me that prevented me from, you know, developing closer and more intimate relationships with my peers. And I left the league community, and, you know, that was, blimey, that's 10 years ago, so about 8 years ago now. And since then, I have sadly, you know, had perhaps 2, maybe 3 serious relapses on gambling and alcohol. But yeah, no, it definitely hasn't been easy. But I'm getting there. I'm getting there. Things are really good now. So I think that experience of the league community provided me with a good start, really. And even 8 to 10 years down the line, I still reflect on that experience. It was a very powerful experience, and some of the learnings I've taken really stick with me. And yeah, it provided me a good start. So I think, well, I won't say it's a criticism, but the league community didn't really allow me to really touch my gambling. It helped me so far, but it didn't go far enough to help me address my gambling. I had to attend the National Problem Gambling Clinic, where I attended some very bespoke cognitive behavioural therapy, and where I was, along with a group of other people who had gambling problems. It took until then where I began to really get to grips with my gambling.
Now, this takes us back really right full circle to the beginning of the conversation, which is gambling is definitely much quieter in the addiction field in terms of exploring it. And I wonder why that is. Why is that the case? And clearly there are implications about that, in the sense that how is it tackled and how is it thought about? Because what I see is somebody who is actually going to be, and is already, an incredibly powerful advocate around gambling addiction that will support other people. That's how I see Owen's trajectory, right? And when I see you, I absolutely believe in your capacity to do that.
Thank you.
So I suppose you've thought long and hard about what is the campaign around awareness around gambling, you know, and so I suppose I would say to you, where are you at in terms of thinking about that as a campaigning activity? Are you a bit of an activist around it? Because raising awareness about it is part of the deal, isn't it?
Yeah, that's a really good question. I'm not too sure if I can answer it as succinctly as I want. So yeah, since for the past few years, I've been very active about trying to do my bit to raise awareness of gambling-related harm. Because the way I see things is that go back 10, 15 years ago, towards the beginning of the millennium, you know, gambling wasn't really acknowledged as a societal issue. It was buried, it was hidden almost. And I'm just reflecting back when, about 16 years ago, when I was 20, when I began to realise, actually, I've got addiction problems and I need to address my gambling and my alcohol. And I remember when I engaged in community-based services and hostels and homeless centres, that, you know, I got a strong sense that they really didn't know how to help me deal with my gambling problem. So I got a strong sense then that the awareness and understanding around gambling harm was very, very low. And we've got to also take into account the political context as well. You know, it was until 2005 when the Gambling Act came in, which they liberalised the gambling sector, and ever since then, you know, the gambling industry have had a clear path to embed itself within the British economy, and hence why we're seeing all of this gambling advertising and increased availability and access to gambling. So the gambling industry has now grown exponentially. But what I see and what I sense is that awareness around gambling-related harm hasn't grown as quickly as the gambling industry has. And I'm really passionate about doing my little bit and share my story to help counteract that disparity between how quickly the gambling sector has grown and the level of awareness, which definitely needs to improve. And through all the meetings I've had with various organisations, it seems very clear to me, you know, as was the case 16 years ago, that, you know, people and professionals who are working with various vulnerable people, I strongly believe now that people do need to become more aware of gambling harm. We're not there yet, and so yeah, it'll be too strong a word to say this is my calling. But it's something I'm incredibly passionate about, and it's something I want to pursue. And I will continue to raise awareness around gambling-related harm through whatever means possible, whether that be through talking to audiences of all kinds of descriptions, which I've already done, which I'm already doing, whether it be blogging or vlogging or talking at conferences. So yeah, it's. Yeah, I'm really just passionate about turning around all that negative experience I have of gambling-related harm and doing something really positive with it. I just feel not morally bound, but just it would be a waste if I didn't use that negative lived experience and do something really positive with it. And I can't not turn a blind eye to what I know about the gambling sector and to just turn a blind eye to it and not do something. Because the gambling sector, it's a growing industry, it's a thriving industry, not just within the UK but globally as well, and it's a very powerful, very rich industry. And I could go on. I don't know if that made any sense.
No, it did, absolutely, and I hope you do go on and on about it, because I think that's a really important point. You know, that the growth of the industry itself has grown far faster than the awareness around the damage and harm that can happen when it's misused and abused and used as a self-soothing strategy, along with alcohol, drugs, and all the rest of it. So I think that's a really important point. And I think you've probably got a lot of work to do in that regard. So what have you got coming up next? What's coming up next?
Well, I'm really glad to say that, you know, in the 7 years I've been involved in the gambling sector, going to conferences and networking and creating a space for myself. You know, I've worked with a lot of professionals within the field. I'm doing a couple of projects now, and there are things in the pipeline. And I'm really pleased to say that you know, there's some really, really good stuff happening, and I'm just trying to. I can't say too much at the moment, but within a couple of weeks' time, within a few weeks' time, I'm going to be making a big announcement. So, one thing I can mention is that I'm involved in the Gambling Support Service. So this organisation, Be Gamble Aware, which collects the voluntary levy from the gambling industry, they have funded a number of posts for the Citizens Advice Bureau to recruit people to roll out gambling support services in different areas of the UK. So Banbury Citizens Advice Bureau in North Oxfordshire, they have employed a project lead, and I'm working with him to roll out gambling support services. So one thing I am doing is helping him to deliver training to organisations and professionals throughout Oxfordshire and the Thames Valley and Northants. So that's another opportunity for me to use my lived experience and share my knowledge and the insight what I have of the gambling industry, to help inform and educate and raise awareness of gambling related harm, which I spoke about just a few minutes ago. So that's one thing. And another thing I'm involved in, a couple of weeks back, you may have seen the NHS announce that they're going to open up 14 new gambling clinics, one of those clinics being a clinic for children and young gamblers. I've been involved in that process. I've had the privilege to have input into the design and development of various gambling services, and that's going to continue. So I've got an opportunity to be involved at this right at the very start, and who knows what could happen, you know. So some opportunity might materialise, you know, to work within a clinical context, and if so, great. But we'll see what happens. So yeah.
Well, that sounds like a lot. But listen, if people want to hear that announcement, how do they find you? What's your Twitter handle?
Yeah, my Twitter handle is at Owen Bailey 1982. Yeah.
Fantastic. Well, listen, Owen, it's been amazing talking to you, and I know you're going to just do great and wonderful things around raising gambling addiction. And, you know, as I started off, just finishing off, you know, saying thank you for opening up your space and talking about your experiences and sharing that with people with a view to supporting and helping people at different points of their own recovery. So thank you, and you take care, and we'll all be keeping an eye on you on Twitter.
Thank you very much, Lisa. Nice one. Thank you. Take care.
Take care.